Hello lovely. So today I'm going to show you a finishing technique, the seaming, the mattress stitch. This is one of my patterns, the Cairngorm vest. This one is just in a single colour, and I'm in the middle of finishing it. So what I'm showing you just now is actually the side seam, which, if you have a look, it doesn't really look very obvious. It's kind of hidden quite well, and it doesn't add extra bulk. Sometimes when I'm crocheting sides, I like to do a crochet slip stitch or a crochet join as you go sort of join, but if you don't want lots of bulk at your side seams, this is a really good option to work. So this is the mattress stitch. It's a really basic stitch. I like to think of it like tying your shoelaces, like lacing up your shoelaces. It's the same sort of crossing over, looping in technique that you would do for a traditional shoelace. So I'm going to show you how to work it on a side seam, which obviously is when you work into the side of a stitch rather than the top of a stitch. This is a granny style cluster that this is, but this technique works for any stitch. So I'm going to show you in this video how to work it on the side seam or on a side of a stitch, and I'm also going to show you how to work it on a shoulder seam or a top of a stitch, so it looks slightly different but also nice and flat and very subtle. So this is the shoulder seam. That's the inside of the shoulder seam. This is the outside of the shoulder seam. And what I'm going to show you initially is using a contrasting colour, just so that you can see where I'm putting the yarn into. But then I'll show you how it looks at the end with the correct colour, so it blends in really nicely. So you can use a contrasting colour if you really want to, and use your yarn scraps, because they're not, this type of stitch can hide the seams quite well, but if you want it to be invisible, you have to go with the same yarn as your project. Okay, so I'm going to get my materials and then we'll get started. Okay, to begin, you'll need a tapestry needle, a darning needle. It can be plastic or metal, just one that's got a blunter end if possible, and a nice big eye to thread your yarn. This is the remnants of my tail that I used to do the first half of the garment, so I'll just pull that out. Don't need that just now. The other thing you'll need is obviously your garment or your project, whatever you're sewing and making and crocheting, and something to cut the yarn at the end. I've got my little Fisker snippers, but yeah, just need something to cut the yarn. I've got, as I said, I'm going to use contrasting yarn just now, just so that you can see better, but I will unpick this and do it in the proper colours, and I'll show you the video of that at the end. Okay, so I have a pink yarn here, my green garment panels, and how we're going to start is the seam that you're going to be sewing. This is the tail that I'm going to be using for the final stitch. Seam that I'm going to sew eventually is actually still attached. The yarn I'm going to use to seam is actually still attached to my shoulder seam, because what I do when I'm finishing a row and I know that I'm going to be seaming it is I leave an extra long tail, so that I don't need to join the yarn and have extra tails and things to get rid of, weave in and so on. So I just make sure that I've got a really long tail to work with for that. Okay, and speaking of tail, so I will just leave that dangling out just now, just pretend it's not there. How do you know? A lot of people have a question about, in my experience, lots of people have questions about how do you know how much yarn to put onto the needle and cut, because obviously when you're crocheting you don't need to worry about that. You're crocheting and working as you go, and you don't need to cut the yarn to size and so on before you start. But with sewing you obviously need an end point for your yarn or your thread. So how you work it out is the length of the part that you're going to seam. Just do it roughly times 3. So there's 1, 2, 3. So I'm just going to need about that much. So I'll snip. Okay, so got my yarn, got my darning needle, pop that through, and got my tail to get stitching, and we're good to go now. So what you need to do first of all on the project is make sure that you've got right sides facing inwards, so like touching each other, kissing each other, whatever, resting against each other, and then the insides should be out, so it's inside out basically. So just make sure that you line up your panels so that they are really straight together, matching up your end and your beginning, and that they are inside out. Now on this it's reversible, so the fabric is the same on both sides. However, on the foundation chain at the start I used a foundation double crochet, and so that does have a right and a wrong side. So the ones on this side here, they look a little bit messier. Those are the inside seam, the inside stitch, and this part where it looks more uniform, and all of the diagonals are going the same way. I would classify that as the right side. So it's not really obvious or super important, I suppose. If you want to make sure it's accurate, just check, even if you've got a reversible stitch, that you've got the foundation chain going in the same direction as well. So I've already matched mine's up, and I've done half of the garment as I've shown you already. So I'm sitting on the floor here, so it's a little bit like don't have much room, but I find it easier to demonstrate when I'm sitting like this rather than at my desk. I don't usually crochet when I'm sitting at a desk upright. I usually am slouching about in the couch or on my bed, or being comfy. So it's easier for me to just sit here and do it. Okay, so the first one I'm going to show you is the ones where we can actually see the top of the stitches. So this is the shoulder seam. You would use this technique if you were using, like, joining granny squares together. It's the same idea, where you can see the top V of the stitches and you're lining them up like soldiers. And remember, this is the inside of the garment, and that's the inside of the garment, so the outsides that you can see, the public view, are hidden inside just now. So I'll line them up together. Remember, I'm ignoring this tail because I will come back and use it later. And I've got a tail at this side too, but I'll cut that later as well. So where is the first stitch of it going to be? There's my corner there. There's the edge there. So what I'm going to do is I'm first of all going to insert my needle. Now we want to use the back loop only. We're using the back loops only, so that's back loop only means the furthest away from you. So the furthest away from me is this one and this one. So So if I get rid of the other side to show you better, so on this panel, the furthest away is this one, all the way along. And I'm going to ignore the front loops, which are these parts of the V's all the way along. Okay, so that's on the panel that's closest to me. I'm using these back loops here. And then on the other panel, the corresponding panel, it's the same thing. I'm going to use the back loops again. That's these ones furthest away, so the ones closest to the wall and furthest away from me. There is an alternative where you would just do both of the stitches closest together, but you will get a different finishing effect with that, and I'll maybe do another tutorial with that technique another time. But in this occasion I'm using back loops only on both of them, and I'm going to do them one at a time. So I'm going to insert my hook, always inserting down the way, so we're never inserting coming up, we're always inserting coming down. So the first one I'm going to insert like that, and I usually would just tie it. You could sew it a few times, but I'm just going to tie it. Right, I'm just going to do one knot because remember I'm going to take this out, but you can secure it in any way you like. So I'll move the tail out of the way just now. That's the first stitch in this part that I want to seam, and I'm now going to find the first stitch of the opposite side, and instead of going up the way, remember we're going down the way, so I'm going to insert like that, and I'll pull up, and then again I'm going down and into the next stitch, and then I'm going down and away. So you're doing the opposite sort of what you want to do. You would expect to always come in, but you're actually going into the stitch furthest away and going out and looping over, and then back into the first the stitch that's furthest away from you. Sorry, my apologies. Like that, and then back in to the stitch furthest away, coming towards us, into the stitch furthest away, back into the stitch furthest away. So into the stitch furthest away from me. You can see, as I said, it looks a bit like a shoelace. So we're going in to the furthest away stitch and coming towards us. We're going into the furthest stitch away in the panel closest to us. And you just repeat that all the way along. Now, when you get to the end, if you're sewing something that you want to be one big massive piece, like a blanket of granny squares, you'll pull it tight, and then the stitches will all vanish and it'll be all very secure. But I don't want mine to be super tight because I don't want it to affect the tension, and I don't want the garment to pucker. So I'm being very mindful about my tension. I'm not pulling it too loose, but I'm also not pulling it too tight. I don't want it to pucker. Oops, got two there. So inserting away and inserting on this side. It does tend to kind of catch on the edge, but just unhook it with your finger. So inserting again, so the furthest away and pulling it towards you, and then on the closest panel inserting to the furthest away stitch and pushing it away from you, and you just repeat that. It's very repetitive, and it doesn't really take very long. You can do this stitch really quickly. So you just work your way along to the end. And then what you'll have is a seam that is quite seamless, if you like, excuse the pun, but also quite invisible. So it won't affect the look of your garment, it won't distract. There are other stitches where you can see the stitch, and that's sometimes an effect that you're going for. But in this occasion, I just want the stitches to be hidden. So I'm almost at the end. And as you can see, remember I said 3 times the amount. So I'm kind of close to that, but that's okay. So if you're really worried that you don't have enough, maybe go for 3.5 times the size. Depends on how loose you make the stitches, but I'm going to be pulling it a bit tighter, so you'll see. So when you come to the end, you've got the end sort of chain that was counting as a stitch, or you've got the end stitch, which can be a little bit like the turning chain. So what you're going to do there is you're just going to make sure that you maintain the pattern as best you can. Oh, my little stitches come out in my little eye. There we go. Is you want it to go right through the end, to the very end as best you can, because you don't want to finish it with a gap. And then I'm going to just pull it through there, and the same, I'm actually going to go in and push it out into the corner. Hopefully you can see that I'm just going to go into the corner stitch and pull it that way. Okay, now if I was finishing this one, I would whip through it a few times to fasten it off. You could even tie it with another end that you've got there, but because as I said, I'm going to pull this out really soon, I'm not going to do that. But that's how it looks without being pulled any tighter. But then what you can do is you can give it a little tug and pull it a little bit tighter, and they'll all pull just like a shoelace would pull tight. It does the same, and as you can see, even with the contrasting yarn, it's pretty unnoticeable, and it's quite flat as well. So that's it from the inside, and this would be the public side, this would be the outside, like that. And you could make it even tighter if you wanted, but remember, again, I don't want to make it too puckered. I don't want to pull it, like you could make it into a drawstring if you really wanted. So so if you pull it too tight, it will pucker. So just make sure that you use your fingers and thumbs to even it out to the tension that you want, and the tension that matches the rest of your garment, so that it's not uncomfortable to wear. So here, I'll give it a little more tug. So that would be what I would be happy with. It matches the same tension, so it doesn't feel weird. But you wouldn't see this if it was in the same matching stitch thread. So this part of the video is showing you when I have taken out the pink yarn, and I'm now using the same yarn with the tail that I'm going to work in for my final project, so that the stitch should be invisible or almost invisible. So I'm just going to speed it up here to let you have a look at how it works for the real shoulder seam. This is part 1 of the mattress seam crochet tutorial. Part 2 will be looking at side seams, where it's very similar, but there's a slightly different step that you have to follow. So make sure you subscribe and follow for the next part 2, where I'll post that shortly. I hope you find this video helpful, and please leave a comment below if you've got any other tips or tricks or anything you would like me to cover, or questions that you have. Until next time, bye lovely.